Her scream tore through the canyon air, sharp as a hawk's cry. "Please help me, Apache." The sound echoed against the stone walls, scattering a flock of blackbirds from the pines and startling a mule deer drinking downstream. Mary Ellen's voice cracked as if it were caught between desperation and disbelief. She had never thought herself the type to beg, never thought she'd call out for a stranger, let alone an Apache warrior, but the wild had a way of stripping pride as easily as it stripped her of clothes. The lake had seemed so inviting when she found it, tucked between cliffs and shaded by tall cottonwoods. The water was cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, but it was the first chance she'd had in weeks to wash the grit and trail dust from her skin. At 30, Mary Ellen carried the weariness of someone much older. Widowhood had carved hollows in her cheeks and shadows under her blue eyes, but there was still a sharpness to her, a defiance that refused to be buried under grief. She had laid her dress, corset, and bonnet neatly on a rock, slipped into the lake, and let the chill water steal her breath. But when she turned back toward the bank, her heart lurched. The pile of clothing was gone. Boots, stockings, even the silver locket that held the only picture of her late husband, all of it had vanished. Laughter snickered through the brush, low and mean. She caught the glint of spurs and the faint whiff of tobacco smoke. Cowhands, drifters, men who had trailed her for miles, watching, waiting for a chance to amuse themselves at her expense. "Where's your preacher now, lady?" One of them jeered, his voice coarse. Another gave a long, mocking whistle, the sound rattling down her spine like a snake's warning. Mary Ellen pressed herself deeper into the lake, the cold water rising to her shoulders. She held her arms across her chest, skin prickling from more than just the chill. Panic fought with rage inside her. She wanted to curse them, to fight, to claw back what was hers, but what weapon did a bare, wet woman have against 3 sneering cowhands with rifles? Her breath came fast, shallow. She whispered a prayer, though even God seemed far from this canyon. She thought of running, but the bank was open, exposed, offering no cover. She thought of diving, but the lake was deep, the bottom slick with mud, and her lungs already ached from the cold. She thought God forgive her of simply sinking, letting the water swallow her whole so that the men could not take more than they already had. And then she saw him. At first, he was only a shape among the trees, a tall figure standing perfectly still, as if carved from the trunks themselves. As her eyes adjusted, details sharpened. Broad shoulders, a chest bare to the sun, skin burnished bronze, hair long and black, falling in heavy strands that caught the light. Around his neck hung a necklace of carved bone and turquoise. He did not crouch or sneak like the cowhands. He did not jeer or move. He simply stood, arms at his sides, watching an Apache, her stomach clenched with a new fear. In Kansas, in the settlements, they had told stories, wild tales of scalps taken, of wagons burned, of women carried into the mountains. She had grown up on such stories, had half believed them, though she knew by now that men like to stretch fear into fables. Still, here he was, living flesh and blood, no tale but reality, and yet he made no move toward her. His gaze was steady, not cruel. There was no laughter in him, no mocking smirk, no vulgar gesture. If anything, his face was unreadable, as though he were weighing whether she was worth saving or leaving to the wolves she had already attracted. Cowhands hadn't seen him yet. They were still chuckling in the underbrush, one of them waving her bonnet like a trophy. But Mary Ellen's eyes clung to the Apaches. He was the only chance she had, even if the chance was slim, even if he despised her. Pride bent under desperation, and the words ripped from her throat before she could stop them. "Please help me, Apache." The forest went still. The cowhands fell silent, heads jerking toward her cry. The wind died, and for a heartbeat, All she could hear was the drip of water from her wet hair and the pound of her own heartbeat. The Apache shifted at last, stepping from the shadow of the trees. He was taller than any of the men who taunted her, and the way he moved was deliberate, unhurried, like a predator that knew its strength. Sunlight poured across his chest, catching the gleam of sweat and muscle. His eyes, dark as obsidian, flicked from Mary Ellen in the water to the cowhands with their stolen loot. Not a word passed his lips, but his presence alone, silent and commanding, rolled over the canyon like distant thunder enough to make Mary Ellen's breath hitch in her throat. The game had changed. Tahu did not move at first. He stood at the tree line like a figure carved into the earth itself, watching with the patience of stone. The cowhands still cackled from their hiding place, but Mary Ellen barely heard them now. All her attention locked on the warrior, the way the sunlight caught in his hair, the way his chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that seemed almost indifferent to her plight. For a moment, she wasn't sure which danger was worse, the leering man who had stolen her clothes, or the silent Apache whose eyes seemed to pierce her down to the bone. The air between them grew heavy, thick with the smell of pine and wood smoke carried faintly from some unseen camp. Her teeth chattered, though not only from the cold of the lake. She wanted to scream at him to turn away, to spare her this shame, but another part of her, the part that had called out, "Please help me, Apache," still clung to hope. Then, without a word, he turned his back. Mary Ellen blinked, confused. She had expected laughter or scorn or some bold stride toward her. Instead, he moved with deliberate calm, as though to grant her dignity. He knelt by a boulder at the water's edge, shrugged off the heavy blanket that had been draped over his shoulder, and laid it carefully on the sun-warmed rock. The fabric was thick, patterned with earth red and black, a design unlike anything she had ever seen. "Climb out," he said at last, his voice deep, carrying an accent but steady as river stone. "No one will look." Her throat tightened. She wanted to trust him, but what choice did she truly have? The cowhands had slunk away when he appeared, their bravado stolen by his presence. But she knew men like that, they would return, and next time they might bring more than laughter. Shivering, she gathered her courage. Slowly, she waded to the shallows, each step heavy with dread. Her feet sank into the mud, weeds tangling around her ankles. She crouched low until the last moment, then lunged toward the rock, snatching the blanket around herself as quickly as she could. The fabric swallowed her small frame, falling past her knees, smelling of smoke and cedar. She clutched it tight, her wet hair plastered to her face, her cheeks burning with humiliation. When she dared to glance up, she saw he still stood with his back to her, arms folded, gazing toward the pines. He had not turned. He had kept his word. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. They took everything." At that, he turned slightly, enough for her to see the line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. His eyes flicked to hers briefly, dark and unreadable, before he nodded once. "White men?" he said, his tone like iron scraped against stone. "They laugh at suffering. It is their sport." Mary Ellen's lips trembled. Anger flared in her chest, anger not at him, but at herself, at those cowhands, at the cruel world that seemed to feed on her pain since the day her husband had died. She straightened, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. "And what are you then?" she asked, her voice sharp despite her fear. "Laughter or mercy?" The corners of his mouth did not move, but his eyes held hers with a weight that made her chest ache. "I am Tahu," he said simply. "I give what is needed, even to those who do not belong." The words struck her harder than the cold water had. She belonged nowhere, that was the truth. Not in Kansas, where the widow's weeds had marked her as cursed. Not on the trail west, where men stared at her with pity or hunger. And now, standing wrapped in the blanket of an Apache, She felt it again, that hollow in her chest where belonging should be. The silence stretched between them. The forest whispered with wind through needles. An owl called from somewhere deep in the canyon, and the rippling water lapped against the stones. Mary Ellen drew a breath, her voice soft but steady. "Then I owe you more than thanks, Tahu. I owe you my trust." His eyes lingered on her a moment longer before he turned away again, as if to give her back what little dignity she had left. "Keep the blanket," he said. "The night will be cold." And just like that, he moved into the trees, his figure vanishing among shadows and light, leaving Mary Ellen standing alone on the shore, shivering, clutching the warmth he had given her, not just of cloth, but of mercy. Wrapped in the heavy blanket, Mary Ellen stood barefoot on the stony shore, the cool fabric pressing against her damp skin. Every breath she drew carried the scent of cedar and smoke woven into the threads. She had nothing left of her own, no clothes, no boots, not even the locket that had held the face of her husband. All had been taken, mocked, paraded in cruel hands before vanishing into the woods. The shame clung to her more tightly than the blanket. It wasn't only that she had been stripped bare in front of strangers. It was the helplessness, the raw, knowing truth that in this wild country she was prey. Tahu stood a few paces away, the fire of the late sun gilding his shoulders. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, muscles shifting beneath bronze skin. He was motionless but not idle. There was an alertness in the way he carried himself, as though every rustle of pine needles and distant bird call carried meaning only he could hear. Mary Ellen lowered her eyes to the dirt at her feet. She wanted to curl inward, to vanish into the ground. Yet something made her lift her chin, meeting his gaze. Her voice came out rough, torn between gratitude and bitterness. "They took everything," she said. "Even my husband's locket." Tahu's dark eyes flicked briefly to hers. "You still breathe," he said simply. "They did not take that." Her lips parted, stung by the bluntness of his words. She wanted to protest, to tell him that the locket had meant more than trinket or metal. It was the last piece of a man she had buried in Kansas soil. But when she looked at Tahu, she realized he had not meant to wound her. His voice held no mockery, only truth, as if survival itself were the measure by which all else must be judged. Tears stung her eyes, though she fought them back. She wrapped the blanket tighter, shivering though the evening air was not yet cold. "I feel as if I belong nowhere," she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. Tahu tilted his head slightly, considering her. "This land does not ask you to belong," he said. "It asks only that you respect it, to walk with care, to take little and give back when you can." Mary Ellen let out a short, bitter laugh. "Respect doesn't stop men like them from stealing everything a woman owns." "No," Tahu said. His gaze turned toward the trees, his voice low and certain. "But respect keeps the spirit alive, even when the body suffers. A woman without clothes can still have pride. A woman without a locket can still have memory. These things no thief can carry away." She looked at him long, studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the calm that seemed etched into every feature. He was unlike any man she had known her husband, the settlers, the drifters. He stood rooted, grounded, untouched by the cruelty she had suffered. And yet, the words he spoke unsettled her. Pride, memory, spirit. They sounded like comforts for a life she did not believe she possessed anymore. Her throat tightened. "And what of you?" she asked suddenly. "Are you like them? Laughter or mercy?" The fire of the setting sun caught in his eyes, making them glint dark and sharp. For a heartbeat he said nothing, and she feared she had pushed him too far. Then his voice came, quiet but firm. "I am Tahu," he said. "I give what is needed, even to those who do not belong." The words hung between them. Steady as the mountains. Mary Ellen's breath shuddered out of her. Her pride told her to scoff, to reject the idea that she needed anything from him. But her heart knew better. She needed the blanket. She needed safety. She needed to believe that not all men saw her as a jest or a prize. The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, heavy, alive with all the things neither spoke aloud. The whisper of the wind through the trees filled it, carrying the smell of pine and damp earth. Somewhere a wolf howled in the distance, long and mournful. Mary Ellen drew herself up, clutching the blanket, her chin high despite her trembling. "Then I suppose," she said softly, "I owe you more than thanks." Tahu did not answer. He did not need to. The look in his eyes, steady and unreadable, told her he had not helped her for gratitude or reward. He had done it because it was what he believed. And in that moment, she realized that mercy, when freely given, was harder to bear than cruelty. The fire crackled low between them, its orange glow licking at the darkness pressing in from the trees. Mary Ellen sat close enough to feel the warmth seep through the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, though her damp hair still clung to her neck and chilled her skin. Sparks drifted upward like restless stars, swallowed quickly by the night sky. Tahu crouched on the other side, silent as ever, tending to strips of venison roasting on a sharpened stick. His movements were deliberate, careful, each turn of the meat, each placement of wood on the flames. Mary Ellen watched him, unable to keep from wondering what kind of man he was. Not just Apache, not just warrior, something more. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was weight, like the stillness of a mountain before a storm. The forest around them whispered. A soft wind stirred the pine needles overhead, an owl hooted far off, and once, the howl of a coyote shivered through the valley. Every sound reminded Mary Ellen how far from town she was, how alone she might have been had Tahu not appeared at the lake. She pulled the blanket tighter. "How did you know I was there?" she asked finally, her voice carrying across the fire. Tahu's eyes lifted, dark and sharp in the flickering light. For a moment, she thought he might ignore her. Then he answered, his voice low and even. "Tracks. Footsteps of men not walking with care." I followed. Her throat tightened. "The cowhands. He must have seen them long before he saw her." "And when you found me?" "I saw a woman in the water," he said. His tone betrayed no judgment, only fact. "And I saw men who thought cruelty was a game." Mary Ellen dropped her gaze to the fire. Shame burned hotter than the flames. She had begged an Apache for help. The thought should have mortified her. Yet when she remembered the way he had turned his back and laid the blanket down, it wasn't humiliation she felt. It was something else, relief, gratitude, a dangerous, fragile trust. Tahu handed her a strip of roasted venison on a flat piece of bark. She hesitated, then took it, the blanket slipping slightly as she freed her hands. The meat was hot, smoky, and tender, and she realized only then how long it had been since she'd eaten anything more than hard biscuits. "You travel alone," he said. Not a question, but an observation. "Yes," Mary Ellen admitted. She chewed, swallowed, then set her jaw. "My husband died in Kansas 2 winters ago. A fever swept through, took him quick. I buried him with my own hands." Her voice cracked on the last words, but she forced herself to go on. "I thought, maybe I could start again out west. Find some small place where no one knows me, where I can build something that belongs to me." Tahu nodded slowly. The firelight caught in the turquoise beads around his neck, casting strange colors on his skin. "The land remembers sorrow," he said, "but it also grows new roots. If you let it." Mary Ellen studied him. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed against her heart. She wanted to scoff, to remind him that roots could be torn up, that sorrow did not fade so easily. but something in his eyes stilled her tongue. They were eyes that had seen loss too, though he did not speak of it. "And you?" she asked softly, surprising herself. "Where do you belong?" For the first time, Tahu's face shifted, a shadow crossing his features. His gaze turned toward the trees, as though the forest itself might answer for him. "My people walk fewer paths now," he said. "Our rivers are taken. Our hunting grounds vanish. I belong where the land still remembers us." His voice was calm, but she heard the ache beneath it, an ache that mirrored her own. She tightened the blanket around her shoulders. In that moment, she felt less alone. Two people stripped of what they loved, one by fever, one by the grinding advance of settlers sitting together in the firelight, sharing silence and venison. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. Mary Ellen leaned closer to its warmth. She realized that though she should have feared him, though every story she'd ever heard warned her to, she did not. Tahu had not taken from her. He had given mercy, food, warmth. And in that fragile space between shadows and flame, she felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't known in years, the possibility of trust. The night pressed in around Sarah like a suffocating cloak. The campfire hissed in the damp air, throwing fleeting sparks into the dark. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, the woven blanket wrapped tightly, her eyes tracing the warrior's profile. Tahu sat across from her, unmoving, as though he were part of the wilderness itself. His muscular frame caught the flickering firelight, his long black hair shifting gently with each stir of the breeze, tribal jewelry glinting like small stars. For hours, neither had spoken much beyond a few clipped words. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full, alive, almost louder than speech. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, the low crackle of wood, the whisper of the forest. She found herself breaking the stillness first. "You could have left me," she murmured, her voice fragile but laced with defiance. "Most men would have." Tahu turned his gaze toward her, the fire reflecting in his dark eyes. "Most men do not honor life," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, and carried a weight that made her shiver, not from fear, but from something deeper. Sarah swallowed, the memory of her humiliation by the lake flashing in her mind. I don't even know who you are. Why help me?" Tahu's jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "You are in danger. The land is not kind to those alone. The lake, the woods, and men who wander with darker hearts." His words hung heavy in the air. Sarah's chest tightened. She understood. He hadn't just meant wild animals or storms. He was warning her of the world beyond the trees, the kind of men who saw women as prey. She looked into the fire, blinking back tears. "I've known men like that," she whispered. "Too many." The warrior said nothing, but his silence was not uncaring. It was listening, the kind of silence that gave weight to her pain. Hours later, when the fire had died down to embers, Sarah shifted, unable to sleep. She tossed beneath the blanket, her damp hair clinging to her skin, her mind restless. Every sound in the forest, the hoot of an owl, the distant snap of a branch, made her nerves jolt. She turned her head slightly. Tahu was still awake. He sat with his legs folded, spine straight, eyes fixed on the darkness. His body seemed carved from stone, yet alive with alertness. "You're not even going to sleep?" she asked softly. He glanced at her, and in the dim glow, she thought she saw the faintest ghost of a smile. "I sleep when danger is far," he said. "Tonight, danger is near." Sarah's heart leapt. "Near?" She repeated. Sitting up, Tahu raised a hand, calming her. "Not here. Not yet. But the wind carries voices. Riders pass not far from this place." Her breath caught in her throat. Riders. Could they be the ones who had stolen her belongings by the lake? The thought made her blood run cold. "They'll be looking for me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "They took my things, and when they find out, I escaped." Tahu nodded once, his expression grim but steady. "Then you must not be found." Panic bubbled in her chest, but when his gaze locked onto hers, something steadied inside her. There was no fear in his eyes, only certainty. For the first time since her nightmare at the lake began, Sarah felt like she wasn't alone. "Why?" she whispered, almost to herself. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Tahu did not answer right away. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, the firelight etching the sharp planes of his face. "Because," he said at last, "even in this land where blood and greed rule, a life has meaning." "Yours has meaning." Sarah's throat tightened. She hadn't expected such words from him, raw, simple, but profound. For years she had carried herself with armor, expecting betrayal, cruelty, or indifference. Yet here was a man who owed her nothing, who belonged to a people the world called savage, and he spoke to her with more respect than any man she had known. The storm broke at last. Lightning forked across the sky, thunder rolling so deep it rattled the ground. Rain began to pour, hissing on the dying embers. Sarah gasped as the chill soaked her blanket. She scrambled toward the nearest tree, but before she could slip, Tahu was there. His hand caught her arm firm, steady, warm even in the rain. His muscles glistened as the downpour cascaded down his chest, his long black hair plastering against his skin. He guided her beneath the shelter of a wide cedar, shielding her with his own body against the wind-driven rain. Sarah trembled, not just from the storm. She could feel the heat of him, the solidness of his frame, and for a fleeting second she forgot her fear. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. For a moment she dared to look up at him. His face was close, closer than it had ever been, his expression carved with focus but softened by something unspoken. Their eyes locked, the storm raging around them like a wild heartbeat. In that instant, Sarah realized something terrifying and undeniable. This man, this Apache warrior, was no longer just her protector. He had become something else, something she wasn't ready to name. And though she told herself it was only the storm, only the fear, she couldn't escape the truth burning in her chest. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the mist clinging to the trees. Sarah shivered, her blanket soaked through from the storm, but she barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the faint crunch of footsteps in the underbrush, on the distant snort of horses that betrayed the approach of men who should not be here. The cowhands from the lake or worse had returned. Tahu stood behind her, a wall of bronze muscle, shirtless, every movement deliberate and controlled. His long black hair clung to his shoulders from the rain, and the tribal jewelry around his neck swung slightly with each shift of his powerful frame. He scanned the tree line, silent, waiting, like a predator coiled before the strike. "They're coming," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling despite the adrenaline. She pressed herself against him instinctively. "They'll kill us." "No," Tahu said, his tone sharp, unshakable. "Not while I stand." The cowhands emerged, their laughter muffled, but sharper than before, filled with the arrogance of men who believed a single woman was nothing without clothing, protection, or allies. One raised his rifle, smirking. "Thought we'd pay you another visit, lady," he sneered. "Your friend here gonna stop us?" Tahu did not flinch. Instead, he stepped into the open, hands relaxed but ready, his body radiating lethal calm. He moved forward slowly, deliberately, each footfall silent on the wet forest floor. The cowhands faltered, uncertainty flickering across their faces. They had expected a naked, shivering woman, not a mountain of a man who radiated both strength and authority. "You leave," Tahu said, his voice low but carrying over the crackle of a distant brook. "Or you will not return to your homes alive." The cowhands laughed nervously. One lunged, but Tahu was faster. He sidestepped, twisting the man's arm until a sharp snap echoed through the clearing. Another swung a fist, but Tahu caught it mid-air, his grip iron, and slammed the attacker into a tree with bone-jarring force. Sarah gasped, clutching her blanket tighter, her chest pounding. Her stomach lurched with fear, but beneath it surged a strange, electric admiration. He moved like a force of nature, powerful, precise, unstoppable. The third man stumbled backward, rifle raised, but Tahu advanced like a shadow of death. With a single fluid motion, he disarmed the man, the gun clattering to the rocks. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. The cowhands fled into the trees, leaving wet footprints behind, leaving Sarah alive, shivering, but unharmed. Tahu turned, noticing her trembling. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Sarah shook her head, though tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "I don't think I could have survived without you," she whispered. He offered her a hand, steady and warm, and she took it, allowing him to guide her to a shallow pool nearby. He knelt, wading into the water, and cupped his hands, splashing cool liquid onto her flushed face. "Breathe," he said softly. "The danger is gone for now." Her heart still raced, but the terror ebbed slightly. She looked up at him, at the broad chest glistening with water and the determined expression carved across his face. I've never seen anyone move like that," she admitted. Tahu's dark eyes softened fractionally. "I do what must be done. You are alive. That is enough." For a long moment, they stood together in the shallow water. The mist curled around them, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The violence was over, but the aftermath, the realization that death had lurked so close, hung heavily. Sarah's hands trembled as she brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. "You saved me," she said again. "And I don't know how to repay you." He shook his head, almost imperceptibly. "Life is repayment enough," Tahu said. "Survive, learn, remember." The water swirled around their ankles, the lake reflecting the pale dawn. The fight had ended, but in its place, something else had shifted. Trust, respect, and a fragile sense of connection neither of them had expected. For Sarah, the lesson was stark. The world was cruel, but strength existed in unexpected forms. And for the first time, she believed she might endure, not just survive, but live alongside the man who had stepped from shadow to save her life. And though the danger would return, and the trail ahead remained uncertain, she knew one thing for certain. With Tahu at her side, she would not face it alone. The sun rose, spilling gold across the misty lake, turning the water into liquid fire. Sarah stood at the edge, still wrapped in the soaked blanket, every nerve alive from the night's terror. The forest was quiet now, as if holding its breath in reverence or fear after the chaos of the previous hours. Tahu knelt beside the water, dipping his hands into the lake and flicking cool drops onto his chest. His long black hair clung to his wet skin, tribal jewelry gleaming in the early light. He was as immovable as a mountain, every muscle taut and ready. Yet there was a gentleness in his movements now, a protective calm that contrasted sharply with the lethal presence he had been just hours ago. Sarah swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on him. "It's over," she said softly, though her voice trembled with relief and exhaustion. "They're gone." "They are," Tahu replied, not looking at her directly, his voice low and deliberate. "But the land is not done testing you." "Neither am I," her brows knitted. "Testing me?" He finally turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Life will try to strip you bare again. It will take, it will challenge, it will judge. What you have now, strength, trust, survival, is yours. Hold it." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mix of shyness, awe, and the lingering adrenaline of the night. You saved me. All of it. You saved me. I don't even know how to repay you." Tahu's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "You already have," he said. "You survived. You trusted." The water lapped gently at their feet. The wind carried the scent of pine, wet earth, and something cleaner hope, perhaps, or the promise of new beginnings. Sarah took a deep breath, tasting the crisp morning air. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of men, of the wild, of myself. But you make me feel like I can face it all." Tahu studied her, his expression unreadable, but his gaze softened. "You are stronger than you know. Stronger than most I have seen. That strength comes not from the body, but from the spirit. Guard it." Sarah wrapped the blanket tighter, feeling its warmth and the lingering heat of Tahu's presence. For the first time in years, she felt the wild not as an enemy, but as a place where she could exist, could breathe, could belong at least a little. A bird called from the treetops, breaking the silence, and Tahu finally rose to his full height. Muscles gleaming in the sun, long black hair flowing over his shoulders, tribal jewelry swinging lightly, he extended a hand toward her. "Come," he said simply. "The path ahead is long. You cannot walk it alone." Sarah hesitated, then stepped forward, taking his hand. His grip was firm, grounding, and for the first time since the lake, she felt entirely safe. Not just physically, but in a deeper sense of protection, of trust, of respect, of something neither had said aloud but both understood. They moved toward the forest together, the lake glinting behind them like a mirror of fire and sky. Every step was careful, measured, but together they were stronger than any threat, stronger than fear, stronger than lost doubt. As they disappeared among the trees, Sarah glanced at Tahu once more. "Will you stay with me?" she asked, voice small but hopeful. Tahu's dark eyes met hers, and in the silent affirmation she understood the answer. He was not bound by obligation or mercy alone. He had chosen this path, chosen to be by her side, chosen to protect and to guide. The morning sun rose fully now, bathing the forest in light. Mist swirled around their ankles, the lake shimmered behind them, and the world seemed wide, alive, and full of possibilities. Sarah breathed deeply, feeling the first flicker of peace in months. The terror, the humiliation, the storm, they were behind her. And ahead, with Tahu, she could face whatever came next. Together, they walked into the forest, their shadows stretching long across the earth, two figures bound by trust, survival, and an unspoken understanding that some bonds, once formed, could never be broken.